Welcome to Finding Forgiveness, a family fairy tale podcast. Join host Susan Gibson as she summons the courage to ask the hard questions, probes deep, dark secrets, and attempts to fill in the gaps while exploring the relationship between her and her mother. Discover the magic of self-discovery, relationship exploration, and the profound journey of forgiveness. Now, your host, Susan Gibson.
Have you ever wondered who your ogres are? Those creatures who are holding you back, perhaps even trying to destroy you? Our ogres may be people who are threats to our existence in some way. And sometimes we're our own ogres, threatening our own existence in some way. No matter which type, our ogres need to be faced in order for us to find forgiveness of ourselves. It's a step in our healing to become whole once again. Goodness knows I'm still facing my ogres, sometimes burying them deep inside, sometimes allowing them to invade my thoughts, and sometimes confronting them in my nightmares. Here's my family fairy tale of Susan facing her 3 ogres. There are 3 ogres I want to introduce you to: J, D, and W. When I was just a little girl, the ogre named J came into my life. He was the older brother of a friend of mine in early childhood, and it was kindergarten age for me. So I was probably 6 or 7 at the time when this ogre showed up. And my friend was a year or so younger than me, and the ogre was a year or so older, maybe 2 years on either side of me. And my friend and I spent a lot of time together, and our parents spent a lot of time together. And one day I was playing at her house. We were playing some board game, and ogre named Jay came in. And somehow he enticed us into his bedroom, and it was on the 2nd floor of the house. And in this neighborhood, all the houses were Cape Cod houses in our little rural community in northern Maine. And so the upstairs rooms had slanted ceilings, and they had cubbies underneath the eaves of the house with a door for storage. So instead of having an attic, it had under eaves storage. And in a lot of homes that had children, that's where you kept games and puzzles and toys and things like that that were used but not used so often. So Ogre J enticed us into his bedroom and somehow got us into the cubby under the eaves there in that storage area. And we'd known each other a few years, but I was just a little girl. But I had some phobias, some that are still with me today. And one is the fear of the dark, and I'm still afraid of the dark. And the second one is claustrophobia. And as a young child, I suffered from it tremendously. I couldn't even stand to be backed into a corner or be on the bottom when you played pile up or be in any kind of confined space. But he got us into this little storage area with the toys and games and things that had access from his bedroom and shut the door. And, I was on alert, but a little girl. And then he turned the light out. And then I was on super alert and being in the dark and in a closed space. Of course, I was with my friend, and that was her home. I was looking to her somewhat for reassurance, but I'm sure I was pounding on the door and asking to be let out. And I might have even threatened to scream. And so he let us out. But he didn't let us go. And he had the door blocked from his bedroom to the rest of the house. And he had a hunting knife. And he told us to strip. Now we were just little girls. We had, undershirts and panties and, our play clothes on. But he threatened us with a knife, and so we did. And something in me, I didn't recognize it as being truly wrong, but I knew it wasn't right. It never happened to me before. And he never touched us. He didn't touch either one of us. And I don't know why he let us go. I might have threatened to scream, but he did let us go. And we never spoke of it. It never came up again. But I avoided him, as children will. And a few years after that, maybe a year or two, both families moved out of this little community dwelling out into the country. And we moved out into the country very far from each other, still in the same town, but a vast distance between us. And my friend invited me to come and stay the night with her in their home out in the country. And we were staying in a pull-out sofa in the den in their house. And I was maybe 9 by now. So like I say, a few years had gone by. And I've always been a light sleeper. And he came down and whispered to me in the night. And he said to me, "Do you remember that time in my bedroom?" Of course I remembered it, but I didn't let him know that. I said no. And he said, "I'd like you to do that again." And I whispered, because I didn't want my friend to wake up. I said, "I don't know what you're talking about, and you need to stay away from me." By this time, I knew it was wrong, and I knew there was something wrong with him asking me to do something like that. And even though we grew up in a small community and we went to the same schools, because of the age difference, we didn't interact. And because our families were now living so far apart from one another, there wasn't the interaction that we had when we lived right across the street from one another. And so I put that ogre to rest until I went into therapy after my mother passed away. And I faced this ogre with my therapist. It was all part of keeping a secret that I'm still living with. And all these years later, I do wonder about the safety and security of my friend growing up in that house with her brother, who was a troubled child and grew up to be a troubled adult. And I hope that she was safe with him as her brother. My second ogre is D. And this ogre appeared in my life when I was in college. And I was working on my undergraduate in mathematics and computer science. And I started interning for U.S. Naval Agency, research agency. And this ogre worked there. He was older than me. All the people who worked there were older than I was. But he was 7 years older than me. And, smart, witty, fun, had fun friends. And we had a whole circle of friends around this job. And for a few years, I would work a semester and go to school a semester. And I alternated that until I graduated in 1984. And he and I developed a relationship. And I'd say outside of high school relationships, he was my first serious boyfriend. And I moved in with him. And I would travel back and forth from school and to where we lived together on the weekends when I was in my semester of school. And when I was interning, I lived with him and we worked together. And after the first year, I broke up with him. And as, things happen and, life takes you in mysterious ways sometimes. But we ended up back together and I moved back in with him. after the second year, he asked me to marry him. And I said yes. I'd met his family. They weren't particularly warm towards me. I think the age difference and the fact I was a college student bothered them in some way. And he had met my dad, and my dad had remarried by this time, and his second wife. And, he was all kind of part of the family, though our families never met one another. And what I realized after I said yes was not only did I not want to marry him, I didn't want to be with him anymore. I was I was coming into ending my junior year in college. I was looking forward to my senior year. My internship was coming to an end, and I just had so many possibilities open to me. And it was end of the spring semester, and I had a different job lined up for the summer with a group of computer scientists I was very excited to be working with for that summer. And then one more semester, I was a December graduate in 1984. I had one more semester after that, and then on to my new life. And I didn't see a place for him in it. And so it was about 6 weeks or so before the end of my spring semester. And I said to him, Ogre D, I don't want to marry you, and I don't want to be with you anymore. So I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to stay there until the end of the semester. And when school is done for that semester, I will make arrangements to come and move my belongings out of the house, and we can go our separate ways. And I thought that was fine. And that's what I did. I went back to school. I finished out this semester. I moved back in with my dad and his wife at the time, my stepmother. And I made arrangements to pick up my belongings. And I borrowed the family car. We had one car amongst the three of us, and I borrowed that for the day, took my dad and stepmother to work. And a friend of Ogre D called me. She was a friend of mine as well, but a longtime friend of Ogre D. And she said, Susan, I want you to know Ogre D has been acting very strangely these past few weeks since you left him. He did not come to work today, and she lived just down the street from him. He did not come to work today, and he's parked his vehicle behind the house so that when you arrive, you'll think he's gone. I thanked her. I mean, what? Oh, goodness. When I look back at this, it was just amazing that she warned me. And I thought I was ready. I thought I was ready to confront him. I had no idea what state he was in. So when I did show up that morning to get my things, I went through the front door of the house, and I announced loudly and confidently, Ogre D, I know you're here, and I've come to get my things, and the furniture we will get at another day when my dad has some time to come and get that. But I'm going to get my personal things now. And he came out of the back of the house with a box full of letters and cards that I'd written to him over those 2 years that we were together. And he said, just sit down for a few moments. Just talk to me. Just sit down. I didn't want to. I could see he was in an agitated state, but I did. And he started reading the cards and letters. And he said, were these all lies? And I said, no, at the time I felt that. I loved you at the time. But it's gone. It's over now. I don't anymore. And it's over. And I could see him getting very tense. And the instinct inside of me just kicked in. And I said, I've got to get out of here. In my mind, I'm like, I have to get out of here. And so I knocked that box of letters and cards out of his hands as a distraction, and I ran for the front door. But he was faster than I was, and he grabbed me, and he forcibly carried me to the bedroom. And I was clawing and grabbing for door jambs and kicking and flailing. And he had a grip around my middle, and there was no letting go. And the hallway was narrow, and we get to the bedroom, and he throws me on the bed. It was a water bed. It throws me on the bed and pins me down and sits on top of me. And he kept me there like that for hours, and terrorizing me. And all I could think of was, this is a man with a computer science degree from MIT. He has a deeply logical and analytical mind. There's got to be some way that I can reach that logical, analytical mind. There's got to be some way. But there was no letting up. And at one point, I remember asking him, "Are you going to rape me?" And he said, "No, I could, but I'm not." And I was trying not to show panic. Of course, I was extremely frightened, very traumatized. I was hurting physically from being restrained and carried with such force and violence. And there was a chair in the corner of the room. And I just tried to keep talking calmly. And I finally said, "Ogre D, if you just let me up and sit in the chair, I won't run. I won't leave. I will sit there and we can talk, but you have to let me up. You have to let me up. You're hurting me, and I'm scared, and I'm tired, and you have to let me up." And he loosened his grip on me, and I could, water beds in those days were just basically a great big pillow of water. And this was a king size. And so, I rolled over to the edge of the bed and made like I was going to sit in the chair. I might have even touched down for a moment. And then I took off running. And thankfully, that bed kind of slowed him down. And I made it out the front door. I didn't even look back. I ran down the hall, out the front door, into my vehicle, closed the doors, locked the doors, started the vehicle. He came running out of the house after me, jumped across the top of the vehicle to the driver's side. But I was like, I am getting out of here. And he's hollering and screaming. And I got out of there. And I was deeply traumatized. And I still had a couple of hours before I needed to pick up my stepmother and then my dad from work. So I went to a friend's house to calm down. When I went to pick up my stepmother, I told her what happened. And she said, "Your father cannot see you like this." So I tried my best to compose myself, shaking, crying, just completely traumatized. And when we went to pick up my dad, he said to me, "I heard you had a rough day today." He said, "Ogre D came to see me at work." My dad was foreman in a lumberyard for a construction company at that time. And Ogre D had told him what he had done to me. And there's so many pieces to this story because it didn't end there. Ogre D went on to stalk me for several years after that. This was a secret that we held deep within my small family unit at that time. I never told anybody who was not part of that experience. To my knowledge, my dad never told anybody. My stepmother never told anybody. We didn't go to the police. Didn't get a restraining order. I tried to live as normal a life as possible with Ogre D stalking me for several years. I graduated from college. I got my first apartment. which he stalked me at. I moved away, a little bit farther away. He did never, to my knowledge, stalk me at that apartment. He might have, but never to my knowledge. I had to let my colleagues at work know. I had to let my employer know. I had to let the receptionist know that if this guy ever came to the office or called me, I could have no interaction with him. I met my husband, future husband. I had to let him know. I needed protectors around me. And after a few years of living like this, Ogre D every once in a while would show up where my dad worked and ask where I was. And my dad never told him. He said, just never mind. I don't know where she is. Never mind. Let it go. Let her go. And he finally showed up one day and told my dad, I'm moving far away, California. I was living in Louisiana at the time. He said, that's the only way I will leave Susan alone, is to be far away from her. When the immediate threat of this ogre was gone, my dad said to me, I thought he was going to kill you, Susan. Ogre D has been a big part of my first therapy. I had suppressed this memory so deep inside of me. It was coming out in dreams and nightmares, I should say, and just very serious nightmares. And of course, my insomnia was not benefiting at all from this experience with Ogre D. And my first therapist in the mid-90s unlocked this memory for me. And the specific type of nightmare, recurring nightmare I was having stopped after she unlocked this memory for me. It was quite a dramatic moment in therapy with her. And I had these intruder dreams that were just horrifying. And she unlocked that and those intruder dreams stopped. My third Ogre, W, was another serious relationship I had after I started my first job and before I met my future husband, now ex-husband. And Ogre W was a master manipulator. And I knew he was manipulating me. I knew he was. But I was not equipped to manipulate at the level that he was. That is for sure. I am not that kind of a manipulator. He was also a sadist. And through the manipulation and the sadism, he was very clever because he would always ask permission to push a boundary with me. And I would always say yes until I said no. And when I said no, he pushed the boundary anyways. And I knew I had to get out of there. I had to leave. I could not live like this any longer. That I lost all sense of choice in the matter. All sense of choice. I didn't have choice. He just made me think I did. And so I plotted my exit. I rented an apartment. I took a day off from work and moved all my things into my apartment. And then I told him I was leaving him. And, one thing about Ogre 3, Ogre W, I had a good friend. I never confided in anybody what depths of destruction he was taking me in. But I did confide with a friend that I didn't think I would live to see 40. So I knew inside of me that this was an extremely destructive ogre that I was facing. The role of therapy has just been so incredible in my life, and I have faced these three ogres in therapy. Ogre D, in my first therapy, that was a big part of that time facing, my behaviors and my nightmares and my insomnia. And the other two Ogre J and Ogre W, as well as Ogre D in my year in therapy. And what I've learned is that we have to face our ogres in order to heal. We have to get through those destructive forces in our lives. We have to face those in order to come out as whole as possible on the other side. Have I found forgiveness with any of them? I believe I hold a child's forgiveness for Ogre J. And, I can't go deeper than that. I think there's a child's forgiveness there because of when his destruction of me happened. The other two, no. And, they took so much from me, and they clearly wanted to destroy me. This was an intentional destruction on both their parts. And I'm just not ready or willing to go to forgiveness with them yet. The impact of their destruction, I still live with. I still have behaviors, hyper-awareness, not living on ground floors or staying in hotels on ground floors. My fear of the dark is still there. I still have nightmares. I make sure I can hear and see everything around me when I'm out in public, especially around strangers. When I'm traveling alone, I check everything about hotels and the hotel room and where is it located and what's the outside access to that room, and so many other behaviors that I'm just not ready to forgive them. I am living with these behaviors, and I live with them every day in some way, shape, or another. I can say good riddance to these ogres. I can face them that way, but forgiveness, I'm not there yet. Maybe one day I will be. But I still feel the danger that they both represent in me. What ogres are you facing? Do they still hold a danger of destroying you? Have you been able to forgive them? I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at hellosusan@findingforgivenesspodcast.com. Thank you for being with me today and listening to my podcast, Finding Forgiveness, a Family Fairy Tale. I welcome your comments. A big thank you to the team at Produce Your Podcast for helping me share my family fairy tale. Until next time, I'm Susan Gibson, signing off with gratitude and appreciation.
Thank you for listening to Finding Forgiveness, a family fairy tale podcast. To continue the conversation, visit findingforgivenesspodcast.com and send an email to hellosusan@findingforgivenesspodcast.com to share your story. Until we meet again.